On this Martin Luther King Day, there is a renewed push on a proposed bill that would restore parts of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which was struck down by the Supreme Court last summer. We just heard from Vice President Joe Biden a few moments ago. Here's what he had to say.
I recently had the honor of speaking to the memorial service for President Mandela at the National Cathedral in Washington. And it was pointed out to me, and to tell you the truth, at first I didn't realize it. In preparation for the speech, it was pointed out to me that I'd be speaking from the same pulpit that was used by Dr. King in his final sermon on March the 31st, 1968. And that was a profound sermon. Dr. King said, and I quote, "Somewhere we must come to see that human progress never rolls on the wheels of inevitability." Let me emphasize that. Never rolls on the wheels of inevitability. He went on to say, "It comes through tireless efforts and persistent work of dedicated individuals who are willing to be co-workers with God." Or as my mom would say, doing God's work. That's what all of you are all about as you fight for economic justice, racial and gender equality, and trying to stem the tide of new attempts to restrict the right of our people to vote. It's the everyday actions that you inspire that are going to keep the human progress rolling forward and keep it from sliding back. But we have to admit, I have to admit, I never thought we'd be fighting the fight again on voting rights.
Now, when the justices struck down parts of the Voting Rights Act, they also challenged Congress to amend it. And that's just what a bipartisan group in the House has done. And that comes just days after a Pennsylvania judge batted down a law that forced voters to show ID to vote. Joining me to talk more about this, Ari Melber, co-host of MSNBC's The Cycle and an attorney who writes about law and constitutional rights. In Washington, Judith Browne Dianis, co-director of the Advancement Project. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Happy King Day.
Happy MLK Day. Among the key protections, Judith, in this proposed new bill, any state that commits 5 or more election violations in a 15-year period falls under federal supervision. 5 strikes, you're out. Voters who feel they've been discriminated against can sue immediately, and you don't have to prove laws intentionally discriminate, just that the discrimination takes place. Real world, why is this important?
Well, you know, this is important because as we sit here and celebrate Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, we have to remember in 1957, he gave a speech in which he talked about give us the ballot. And in that speech, he talked about the fact that we needed courageous moral leadership in Congress to get the vote. And so we're calling on Congress to keep its bipartisan effort moving, because we know too many places throughout the country, in the states, that there's partisan manipulation of the vote that is targeting Black and Latino voters and Asian voters, young voters and elderly voters. And so this Voting Rights Act is important. Unfortunately, right now, what we have as a proposal is a floor and not a ceiling. And so this Congress has to be courageous, as Dr. King said, and move for more protections, because under it, North Carolina, which has passed this most oppressive voter law, and places like Florida that have a history from 2000 on of continuous discrimination against African American voters, are not covered by this new bill.
And in fact, Ari, you've written about this. You say there's a major hole in this proposed legislation. Tell us about it.
Yeah, there is a hole. You mentioned in your reporting, Chris, that Pennsylvania was just striking down a voter ID law. What this rule would do in this new law is basically say that it would patrol places where there are these discriminatory violations, and if you have enough, you get into federal supervision. But if the Justice Department says that there's voter ID laws that are discriminatory, that doesn't count towards that supervision. The only thing that would count would be a judge saying it. That's one of the areas where I would definitely associate myself with Judith's remarks, that we need to have this as a floor to think about these requirements and what is enough. The other point, I mean, you've invited us here to talk about this on Martin Luther King Day. We had the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. That was an anniversary of activism. As we go into 2014 and 2015, we'll have the 50th anniversaries of the result of that activism. The Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65. I think it's tremendously positive that Republicans joined Democrats last week in setting this floor, in actually doing something. Congressman Sensenbrenner, who's been a leader on this issue. So for folks who look at these anniversaries and say they're all just symbolism, or on a day like today, well, are we only listening to the speeches? No, we're talking about how to continue the legacy and keep it on the books, on the federal code.
Someone who's been talking about this always is John Lewis, of course, the civil rights icon. And he had this to say at the bill's unveiling.
It is amazing to me. It is unbelievable. It is almost unreal that we were able to come together so quickly to craft a compromise that both Democrats and Republicans can find a way to support and move forward.
A note of optimism, but let me ask you both very quickly. We have less than a minute. Judith, what are the chances that this gets through?
I think it's going to get through. We have a quick bipartisan effort, and it's the Voting Rights Act. And we know that voting is fundamental in this country, and I think they're going to get behind it.
Ari?
The numbers are that last time it passed the House by huge majorities. It passed the Senate with over 90 votes. So we do know there is an appetite for this. Politically, a lot of this will come down to Eric Cantor, someone who said he's open to it. He's got to push to get it on the floor. The votes are on the floor. As we know, with this House, the trick is to get motions onto the floor.
Ari Melber, Judith Browne Dianis, thanks to both of you.